Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, throughout all the debate about how we leave the European Union, some Brexiters have maintained that Britain has nothing to fear from leaving without a trade deal. Instead, we would be subject to the rules of the World Trade Organization, the WTO, and in their view, this would be the purest form of a clean Brexit. But do the claims stack up? Well, Rachel Younger has been investigating.
When politicians talk about a no-deal Brexit from the EU, what they're advocating is trading with the EU on WTO terms. The WTO, or World Trade Organization, began after the Second World War, and it's a place where 164 countries negotiate the rules of international trade. There are also 23 observer countries, including Iran and Iraq, who are currently discussing access. Now, each member sets their own tariffs or duty on goods coming in from abroad, as well as quotas on how much of each product can be imported. Countries within the EU set one uniform tariff for goods coming into the bloc from outside it. Now, those tariffs vary depending on the industry, so if the UK were to trade with the EU on WTO terms, it would mean our manufacturers paying an export tax on electrical machinery of 2.5%. But it would be 10% on British cars. And for our cheese and dairy farmers, the export duty would be almost 36%. Remember that as EU members currently, we don't pay any tariffs on EU goods going out or coming in. So tariffs would also be felt by UK consumers.
You would also face increase in prices of vegetables that we do import a lot from Spain, for example. And so this is very likely to translate into higher consumer prices. And so if the wages don't move, which is very likely, then it means lower living standards.
Now, we could choose to lower or waive our own tariffs on goods coming in to try to stimulate free trade with the EU and bring down prices for consumers. But under WTO rules, that would mean lowering tariffs for all countries, potentially flooding the market and undercutting our own producers.
With this idea of going into WTO with very low tariffs, what you also lose then is your currency for trade agreements. These much vaunted sort of trade deals which the UK is going to conclude, what you have as currency is the protection of your market. If your tariffs are very low, no one's interested in concluding a trade agreement with you because they have access to your market anyway. Why would they reciprocate?
So the prices we pay in the shops might go up, but what would be the impact on jobs? A recent study from the UK Trade Policy Observatory at Sussex University estimated a no-deal Brexit could cost up to 750,000 jobs. That's around 2.5% of the total job market. Now, many Brexit supporters, like Jacob Rees-Mogg, claim switching to WTO terms would be much better. But far from being the norm, no country in the world trades exclusively on WTO terms. All 164 member countries have negotiated better access to at least one market. But as we're finding out, trade deals are both highly complicated and lengthy. The EU's most recent trade deal with Japan came into force this month, but took 6 years to complete. A no-deal Brexit could mean trading on less favourable WTO terms for many years to come.
Rachel Younger there.
Well, we haven't so far mentioned no deal. That has the ring of a sort of convenient political lever, perhaps, and Theresa May never fails to remind us that it lies on the other side of her proposed deal. But for those whose work is around planning and contingency, it has to be taken seriously. Today, 30 business leaders in the food and drink sector have written to the government saying no deal looks like the most likely outcome, and they are now totally focused on working to mitigate the catastrophic impact. Tonight, Newsnight can reveal the extent of the NHS no deal planning. A letter sent out today to chief executives by NHS England, seen by Newsnight, warns trusts that they should plan for lead times of around 3 days longer for critical items used in emergency procedures. It also encourages hospitals to rehearse the impact of disruption to their supply chain in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Here's Deborah Cohen.
Delayed operations, increased waiting times and vital medical supplies running out. Recent warnings from hospitals about the impact of a disorderly Brexit. Behind the scenes, officials have been described as close to panic. Publicly, the Department of Health and Social Care has insisted detailed plans are afoot to ensure access to healthcare in the event of no deal. But some hospital managers have remained unconvinced. Now, Newsnight can reveal further details about the preparations in the supply chain of medical devices and clinical supplies, and how hospitals should rehearse the impact of disruption to the supply chain on the NHS. A letter to chief executives and heads of procurement by NHS England, seen by Newsnight, warns trusts should plan for lead times of around 3 days longer for critical items used in unplanned or emergency procedures. This is often equipment that is expensive, and the NHS relies on next-day delivery to top up stock. Hospitals should increase the locally held high-risk products and buy them in a wider range of sizes. Trusts must be prepared to receive goods 24 hours per day, 7 days a week, something that's not routinely done. The letter also advises trusts to make adjustments to mitigate against the longer lead times. This includes planning elective surgery lists further in advance and testing emergency scenarios when an item is unavailable. Or they should consider using alternative products that are available. An accompanying document reveals the amount of work associated with the planning. Over 1,300 suppliers of medical devices and clinical consumables have been contacted by the DHSC to understand their supply chains, reliance on the supply from the EU and contingency measures for no deal. Additional freight capacity has been secured on alternative routes from the continent, with products upon which the NHS depends having priority. Newsnight understands it's the first of many letters, but is this enough to assuage the concerns?
Well, that was Deborah Cohen with the first of many letters. What's been the response tonight, Deborah?
So the majority of attention is focused on drugs and stockpiling of drugs. This is different, it's medical devices and the NHS. So it's things like heart valves and pacemakers and hip implants, and the NHS often doesn't buy them in large volume because they're expensive. And the Department of Health say that they're confident in the supply chain. Sarah Wollaston, who's chair of the Health Select Committee, has told us that the advice is sensible, but we need to know more details about where the vulnerabilities lie, particularly if there are devices that we don't produce in the EU, in the UK, for example, dialysis tubes. And this is echoed by some chief executives, and they want to know which products are most at risk. Trusts are also going to be expected to provide 24/7 services to pick up the deliveries, and there'll be alternative freight routes. And we've been speaking to the Nuffield Trust, which is a health think tank, and they say that there's going to be a reliance on new routes, and that requires hundreds of companies switching supply routes almost overnight, getting the paperwork in order and arriving on time for the ferries.
Debs, thanks very much indeed.